When I bound Peter Rabbit using the Sewn-Board structure, I wondered out loud if I could cover this type of binding with a single piece of cloth rather than covering the spine and then the boards. Heaps of you wanted to know too. In this video I'm going to give it a go, and to build the suspense I'm not going to tell you how it works out yet. You can skip to the end and just see how to do the covering part, or you can listen to me ramble on about ways other than the internet to improve your bookbinding and about modifying the books I demonstrate in these videos. As I've detailed in other videos, the Sewn-Board's binding was originally developed by Gary Frost in the 80s. I've made a bit of a bibliography listing everything I've come across on this structure. This is the sort of thing that I provide to my Patreon supporters, and if you can afford a few dollars and would like to support me, you might consider becoming a Patreon. Or you can look in the description of my older videos on the subject, where I think I list most of them anyway. And while I'm doing a bit of a self-promotion, you can also support me by buying the PDF of Squirrel Nutkin that I edited. The link is in the description. If you're an Apple user, I highly recommend you buy the PDF through the Patreon webpage rather than through the Patreon app, so you avoid the outrageous 30% fee that Apple adds. While I have a chat about this book, I'm just going to make the text block just like I did for Peter Rabbit. It's the same paper, same number of sections, printed the same way. Everything up to trimming the edges is the same. But I did try taking video from different angles to make it more interesting, and I've been trying to make the video more dynamic by cutting on action, whatever that means. It's bookbinding. How much action is there? It's hard to get the third and fourth cameraman to stay awake. I've been assured this will get me thousands of new subscribers. Sorry, I'll get back to the book. I get lots of comments about things like, doesn't the drumming on make the book weaker? And isn't it going to fall apart? Why doesn't it have squares? Can I make it with squares? The edges of the boards at the spine are ugly. I mean, what does Gary Frost know about bookbinding? What was he thinking? If you know a bit about bookbinding, and I don't mean from watching videos on the internet, but by being involved in the physical bookbinding community, then you'll probably know Gary Frost is a legend and he knows a lot about bookbinding. I'll never know a fraction of what he knows. By being an active member of an organisation such as the Society of Bookbinders, or the Guild of Bookworkers, or one of the many other community bookbinding groups, and by reading their literature published by these organisations such as their newsletters, or the journals such as The Bookbinder, you'll stay up to date with the latest developments in bookbinding, and you'll be part of the community that includes the leading bookbinders around the world, people that almost never appear on the internet. If you really want to know why he drums on, and there's no squares, and about the durability of the binding, you can read his articles on it, which are mostly published by organisations like the ones I've mentioned. I have tried to cover some of this in the videos, but you can go right from the horse's mouth. A quick sidetrack. I know a lot of people like it when things don't go quite right and I show how to fix things on the fly. In this video, I make a really bad mistake. The other type of mistake, the sort I normally don't mention at all because it's embarrassing. I didn't even notice it until I was editing the video, and I had to rush down to the bindery to check I'd really done it. I could have edited the video so you'd never be able to see it, but I'm curious to know if anyone notices. For this book, the only real fix is to throw it in the bin and start again. It's worse than the spelling mistake in the spine title, which I could have applied a label over. I hope this makes you feel better when you make a mistake like this. Actually, I hope you never make a mistake like this. I reveal the mistake in the video description. The big hint is that I was binding a copy of Peter Rabbit and Squirrel Nutkin at the same time. Let's get back to talking about making modifications to binding structures. Gary didn't go to the International Standards Organisation and raise an enforceable standard on the Sewn-Board's binding. He published a general description for a very flexible binding system which is very open to modification. He absolutely encourages experimentation. If you don't like the drumming on, you're free to completely glue everything down. I do experiments like this all the time. Doing this sort of experimenting will improve your bookbinding no end. Worst case, it becomes obvious why your great idea isn't common practice, and the best case is you find a way of doing something that you prefer, and it becomes part of your individual bookbinding style. But be careful about thinking you've invented something new. Just about every variation imaginable has been done before. Gary Frost will even tell you that the Sewn-Board's binding is just a very modern take on medieval laced-on boards bindings. If you want squares, go ahead. There are a couple of ways to get squares. You can very carefully pre-trim the sections to the same size before sewing, so you don't have to trim the book after sewing, and the board sections are made appropriately larger. Or you can sew all the sections, leaving long tails of thread at start and finish, trim the book block, then sew on the boards. Simple. Bookbinding is a continuum. It's not like engineering where you have to work to tight tolerances or something simply won't work. You get that screw thread pitch out by a fraction of a percent and the bolt won't screw in. Bookbinding is very tolerant of variation. Sometimes I wish it wasn't, because it is tolerant of bad ideas too, and thus doesn't provide timely feedback. Some of the beautiful and highly skilled trade bindings of the late 19th and early 20th century used some techniques that have been shown by time to be bad ideas. I'm sure at the time they made sense, but they were wrong. One that stands out for me was the oversewing of the first and last sections. You don't have to look at many well-used books from this period to see that this feature that was designed to add strength meant that the pages have come adrift because of the line of perforations and strain on the paper that this added, often made worse by a cloth guard. A very trendy practice at the moment is to recover paperbacks in squareback cases. I think many people think this is somehow protecting a paperback and making them more enduring. I think it's a bad idea, resulting in more strain on the spine and exposing the pulpy paper to the atmosphere more by the addition of squares. And they almost certainly no longer open as well and will certainly sag in their covers, leading to them falling out of the case prematurely to most likely be discarded before their time. I see a lot of stuff on the internet and think that book won't last 10 years if it gets used, and if the person that made it is still bookbinding, I'm guessing they'll blame the materials rather than a poor design. I might be wrong. Okay, I've rambled on enough. We can get back to binding Squirrel Nutkin. I've had comments from people worrying about me putting my hand under the guillotine blade. It's really hard to position the book without doing this. This is why a modern guillotine with modern safety features is really important. I'm afraid antique guillotines are one thing I think are best left as static displays in museums or only used under very special conditions, not as everyday tools. With this ideal guillotine, the blade is locked up when the front safety guard is up, and once the guard is closed, the red safety lever needs to be lifted as well as the blade lever being pulled down. This requires two hands to operate, and only your third hand could possibly be in danger. Also, notice how the blade in the up position is flush up against the back clamping mechanism, which extends down past the edge of the blade. My hand can't contact the edge of the blade in any way that could cut me. I wanted to do something different for the exposed board edges for this book. Last year, Schmet sent me a heated roller for foiling the edges of books. For the last month, I've been putting it through its paces. I'll do at least one full video on edge foiling and using this roller. But here's a preview. One thing I learned quickly is that you can't skimp on edge preparation before using the roller, and it's different to using the traditional gold leaf. Using the cabinet scraper can cause an issue for the roller. Sandpaper is the way to go. Even though the foil should work on many papers without, I've found that the use of a size or primer is needed for many papers and greatly increases the chance of success for all papers. I've found it's just easier to always use it, and temperature and pressure are very important. Just like traditional edge gilding, using foil also takes practice and some time to develop the muscle memory needed to get reliably good results, and even then, some edges will have faults and some will need redoing. It is easier than using gold leaf. I designed a one-piece cover and printed it on book cloth. The trickiest part to this project is making the cover fit the book. I measured the thickness of the spine, and it's 12mm thick. I adjusted the cover for this thickness. I made the spine area a dark blue to make it look like a quarter binding. The edge of the dark blue would be the breakaway spine point. I also wanted to experiment with making the breakaway spine thinner, and this is only 5mm wide. The next tricky part is getting the cover material correctly positioned on the book. To help with this, I put some guidelines at the head and tail of the spine just off the edge of the printed area. These mark the center axis and where the shoulders should be. I made prick marks through the cloth with an awl and drew lines joining the marks on the back of the cloth. I also put a mark in the center of the center line vertically. I cut a spine stiffener 12mm wide out of card and position it so it's centered vertically and mark the head and tail. This can now be glued in place. I draw a line along the top and bottom of the spine stiffener, and where it intersects the outer edges of the dark blue spine area is where the cover material can be cut and then turned in. I then fold the covering material along the edges of the spine stiffener and the dark blue spine area. To apply the cover, I need a glue line on the inside of the material that matches the position of the edge of the dark blue area. I just place a piece of folded waste along the crease line and apply a line of adhesive. I'm going to continue with drumming on, but you're welcome to glue out the cloth sufficiently to completely attach it to the board. Place the book in the covering material and draw it on. Now it's a simple matter of trimming the corners and doing the turn-ins. Head and tail first, then the foredge, and lastly put down the paste down. Again, I'll just drum it on at the edges, but you can glue it out completely if you like. I hope you've enjoyed today's video. I'd love to hear how your books turned out and if you followed what I did or made your own modifications. Until next time, cheerio.